Hello, YouTube. I'm back. I'm back at the beginning of Anti-Oedipus, Capitalism and Schizophrenia. I'm still reading Deleuze's Nature and Philosophy and delving into Bergsonism, sometimes, not very often, and sometimes cinema. One. What else? And I'm reading a bit of nature as well. Genealogy of morality or morals, however it translates it. And state of being morals or the morals themselves? Morals themselves. Mm-hmm. So Anti-Oedipus. Shall I skip the contents page? What do we got? Michel Foucault, introduction by Mark Seam. Yeah, I'm going to skip it. This goes straight out over my head. As a contents page, it reminds me a little bit of Aristotle's because it's so in depth. Aristotle's more so. They go over pages. Preface. Michel Foucault. I just know about a volume control the old. Da-da-da-da. During the years 1945 to 1965, I'm referring to Europe, there was a certain way of thinking correctly, a certain style of political discourse, a certain ethics of the intellectual. One had to be on familiar terms with Marx, not let one's dreams stray too far from Freud, and one had to treat sign systems, the signifier, with the greatest respect. These were the three requirements that made the strange occupation of writing and speaking a measure of truth about oneself and one's time acceptable. Then came the 5 brief, impassioned, jubilant, enigmatic years. At the gates of our world, there was Vietnam, of course, and the first major blow to the powers that be. But here, inside our walls, what exactly was taking place? An amalgam of revolutionary and anti-repressive politics, a war fought on 2 fronts against social exploitation and psychic repression, a surge of libido modulated by the class struggle, perhaps. At any rate, it is this familiar, dualistic interpretation that has laid claim to the events of those years, the dream that cast its spell between the First World War and fascism over the dreamiest parts of Europe, the Germany of Wilhelm Reich and the France of the Surrealists, had returned and set fire to reality itself. The dream that cast its spell between the First World War of fascism over the dreamiest parts of Europe, the Germany of Wehrmann and France of the Surrealists, had returned and set fire to reality itself, Marx and Freud in the same incandescent light. But is that really what happened? Had the utopian project of the 30s been resumed, this time on the scale of historical practice? Or was there, on the contrary, a movement toward political struggles that no longer conformed to the model that Marxist tradition had prescribed? Toward an experience and a technology of desire that were no longer Freudian? It is true that the old banners were raised, but the combat shifted and spread into new zones. Anti-Oedipus shows, first of all, how much ground has been covered, but it does much more than that. It wastes no time in discrediting the old idols, even though it does have a great deal of fun with Freud. Most important, it motivates us to go further. It would be a mistake to read Anti-Oedipus as the new theoretical reference, that much heralded theory that finally encompasses everything, that finally totalizes and reassures, and the one we are told we need so badly in our age of dispersion and specialization where hope is lacking. One must not look for a philosophy amid the extraordinary profusion of new notions and surprise concepts. Anti-Oedipus is not a flashy Hegel. I think that Anti-Oedipus can best be read as an art in the sense that it is conveyed by the term erotic art. In the sense that is conveyed by the term erotic art, for example, informed by the seemingly abstract notions of multiplicities, flows, arrangements, and connections, the analysis of the relationship of desire to reality and to the capitalist machine yields answers to concrete questions that are less concerned with why this or that than with how to proceed. How does one introduce desire into thought, into discourse, into action? How can and must desire deploy its forces within the political domain and grow more intense in the process of overturning the established order? Ars erotica, ars theoretica, ars politico. Whence the three adversaries confronted by Anti-Oedipus, three adversaries who do not have the same strength, who represent varying degrees of danger, and whom the book combats in different ways. One, the political ascetics, the sad militants, the terrorists of theory, those who would preserve the pure order of politics and political discourse, bureaucrats of the revolution and civil servants of truth. Two, the poor technicians of desire, psychoanalysts and semiologists of every sign and symptom, who would subjugate the multiplicity of desire to the twofold law of structure and lack. Three, last but not least, the major enemy, the strategic adversary, is fascism, whereas Anti-Oedipus's opposition to the others is more of a tactical engagement, and not only historical fascism, the fascism of Hitler and Mussolini, which was able to mobilize and use the desire of the masses so effectively, but also the fascism in us all, in our heads and in our everyday behavior, the fascism that causes us to love power, to desire the very thing that dominates and exploits us. I would say that Anti-Oedipus, may its authors forgive me, is a book of ethics, the first book of ethics to be written in France in quite a long time. Perhaps that explains why its success was not limited to a particular readership. Being anti-Oedipal has become a lifestyle, a way of thinking and living. How does one keep from being fascist, even especially when one believes oneself to be a revolutionary militant? How do we rid our speech and our acts, our hearts and our pleasures of fascism? How do we ferret out the fascism that is ingrained in our behaviour? The Christian moralists sought out the traces of the flesh lodged deep within the soul. Deleuze and Guattari, for their part, pursue the slightest traces of fascism in the body. Paying a modest tribute to Saint Francis de Sales, one might say that Anti-Oedipus is an introduction to the non-fascist life. This art of living counter to all forms of fascism, whether already present or impending, carries with it a certain number of essential principles, which I would summarize as follows. if I were to make this great book into a manual or guide to everyday life, free political action from all unitary and totalizing paranoia. Develop action, thought, and desires by proliferation, juxtaposition, and disjunction, and not by subdivision and pyramidal hierarchization. Withdraw allegiance from the old categories of the negative, law, limit, castration, lacuna, which Western thought has so long held sacred as a form of power and an access to reality. Prefer what is positive and multiple, difference over uniformity, flows over unities, mobile arrangements over systems. Believe that what is productive is not sedentary, but nomadic. Do not think that one has to be sad in order to be militant, even though the thing one is fighting is abominable. The 17th century priest and bishop of Geneva, known for his introduction to the devout life, St. Francis de Sales. It is the connection of desire to reality. Do not think that one has to be sad in order to be militant, even though the thing one is fighting is abominable. It is the connection of desire to reality and not its retreat into the forms of representation that possesses revolutionary force. Do not use thought to ground a political practice in truth, nor political action to discredit as mere speculation a line of thought. Use political practice as an intensifier of thought and analysis as a multiplier of the forms and domains for the intervention of political action. Do not demand of politics that it restore the rights of the individual as philosophy has defined them. The individual is the product of power. What is needed is to de-individualize by means of multiplication and displacement, diverse combinations. The group must not be the organic bond uniting hierarchized individuals, but a constant generator of de-individualization. Do not become enamored of power. It could even be said that Deleuze and Guattari care so little for power that they have tried to neutralize the effects of power linked to their own discourse. Hence the games and snares scattered throughout the book, rendering its translation a feat of real prowess. But these are not the familiar traps of rhetoric. The latter work to sway the reader without his being aware of the manipulation and ultimately win him over against his will. The traps of anti-Oedipus ate those of humour. So many invitations to let oneself be put out, to take one's leave of the text and slam the door shut. The book often leads one to believe it is all fun and games when something essential is taking place, something of extreme seriousness, the tracking down of all varieties of fascism, from the enormous ones that surround and crush us to the petty ones that constitute the tyrannical bitterness of our everyday lives. Introduction. By Mark Seam. We must die as egos and be born again in the swarm, not separate, the self-hypnotized, but individual and related. Henry Miller, Sextus. The anti-ego. Lie down then on the soft couch with the analyst, which the analyst provides, and try to think up something different. The analyst has endless time and patience. Every minute you detain him means money in his pocket. Whether you whine, howl, beg, weep, cajole, pray, or curse, he listens. He is just a big ear minus a sympathetic nervous system. He is impervious to everything but truth. If you think it pays to fool him, then fool him, who will be the loser. If you think he can help you and not yourself, then stick to him until you rot. Reference notes begins on page 383. And it has footnote 1. Okay, Henry Miller, Sexus, pages 429 to 30. So concludes Henry Miller in Sexus, and Chuck Gilles, Deleuze, and Felix Guattari are quick to agree in their attack on psychoanalysis's own Oedipus complex, the Holy Family, Daddy, Mummy, Me, an attack that is at times brutal and without pity, at other times sympathetic and full of a profound love of life, and often enormously amusing. An attack on the ego, on what is all too human in mankind, on Oedipalized and Oedipalizing analyses and neurotic modes of living. In confronting and finally overturning the Oedipal rock on which man has chosen to take his stand, anti-Oedipus comes as a kind of sequel to another similar venture, the attack on Christ, Christianity, and the herd in Nietzsche's The Antichrist. For who would deny anti-Oedipus begins that psychoanalysis was from the start, still is, and perhaps always will be, a well-constituted church and a form of treatment based on a set of beliefs that only the very faithful could adhere to, that is, those who believe in a security that amounts to being lost in the herd and defined in terms of common and external goals. And that's quite a long sentence. I just go back and double read over that one. For who would deny anti-Oedipus begins that psychoanalysis was from the start, still is, and perhaps always will be, a well-constituted church and a form of treatment based on a set of beliefs that only the very faithful could adhere to, that is, those who believe in a security that amounts to being lost in the herd and defined in terms of common and external goals. Well, not me. I won't get on that. But where do such beliefs originate? What are they based on? For it is absolutely hopeless to think in terms of security, as Miller states in Sexus. There is none. The man who looks for security, even in the mind, is like a man who would chop off his limbs in order to have artificial ones which will give him no pain or trouble. Page 428. No pain, no trouble. This is the neurotic stream of a tranquilized and conflict-free existence. Such a set of beliefs, Deleuze and Guattari demonstrate, such a herd instinct, is based on the desire to be led, the desire to have someone else legislate life, the very desire that was brought so glaringly into focus in Europe with Hitler, Mussolini, and fascism, the desire that is still at work, making us all sick today. Anti-Oedipus starts by reviving Rieck's completely serious question with respect to the rise of fascism. How could the masses be made to desire their own repression? This is a question which the English and Americans are reluctant to deal with directly, tending too often To respond, fascism is a phenomenon that took place elsewhere, something that could only happen to others, but not to us. It's their problem. Is it, though? Is fascism really a problem for others to deal with? Even revolutionary groups deal gingerly with the fascisizing elements we all carry deep within us, and yet they often possess a rarely analysed but overriding group superego that leads them to state, much like Nietzsche's man of resentment, that the other is evil, the fascist, the capitalist, the communist, and hence that they themselves are good. This conclusion is reached as an afterthought and a justification, a supremely self-righteous realization for a politics that can only squint at life through the thick clouds of foul-smelling air that permeates secret meeting places and security councils. The man of resentment, as Nietzsche explains, loves hiding places, secret paths and back doors. Everything covert entices him as his world, his security, his refreshment. He understands how to keep silent, how not to forget, how to wait, how to be provisionally self-deprecating and humble. Nietzsche on the Genealogy of Morals, Walter Kaufmann. 1969, and it's I-17, page 38. Such a man, Nietzsche concludes, needs very much to believe in some neutral, independent subject, the ego, for he is promoted by an instinct of self-affirmation and self-preservation, a self-preservation that cares little about preserving or affirming life, an instinct in which every lie is sanctified. I'll just read that again because Such a man, Nietzsche concludes, needs very much to believe in some neutral, independent subject, the ego, for he is prompted by an instinct of self-affirmation and self-preservation that cares little about preserving or affirming life, an instinct in which every lie is sanctified. 3. Ibid. This is the realm of the silent majority, and it is into these back rooms behind the closed doors of the analyst's office, in the wings of the Oedipal theatre, that Deleuze and Guattari weave their way, exclaiming, as does Nietzsche, that it smells bad there, and that what is needed is a breath of fresh air, a relationship with the outside world. In examining the problem of this subject, the behind-the-scenes reactive and reactionary man, anti-Oedipus develops an approach that is decidedly diagnostic. What constitutes our sickness today, and profoundly healing as well? What it attempts to cure us of is the cure itself. Deleuze and Guattari termed their approach schizoanalysis, which they oppose on every count to psychoanalysis, where the latter measures everything against neurosis and castration. Schizoanalysis begins with the schizo, his breakdowns and his breakthroughs, for they affirm a schizophrenic out for a walk is a better model than a neurotic lying on the analyst's couch. Against the Oedipal and the Oedipalized territorialities, family, church, school, nation, party, and especially the territoriality of the individual, anti-Oedipus seeks to discover the deterritorialized flows of desire, the flows that have not been reduced to the Oedipal codes and the neuroticized territorialities. the desiring machines that escape such codes as lines of escape leading elsewhere. Now I'm just going to read that again as well. Against the Oedipal and the Oedipalized territorialities, family, church, school, nation, party, and especially the territoriality of the individual, anti-Oedipus seeks to discover the deterritorialized flows of desire, the flows that have not been reduced to the Oedipal codes and the neuroticized territorialities, the desiring machines that escape such codes as lines of escape leading elsewhere. So those neuroticized territorialities are desiring machines that escape such codes as lines of escaping. To discover the deterritorialized flows of desire, the flows that have not been reduced to the Oedipal codes and the neuroticized territorialities. These are the desiring machines. Seek to discover the deterritorialized flows of desire, the desiring machines, I suppose, that escape such codes as lines of escape leading elsewhere. Much like R.D. Laing, Deleuze and Guattari aim to develop a materialistically and experientially based analysis of the breakdowns and the breakthroughs that characterize some of those labeled schizophrenic by psychiatry. I've got that label. Schizoaffective. Yeah, it's more socially acceptable. Rather than view the creations and productions of desire, rather than view the creations and productions of desire, or all of desiring production, from the point of view of the norm and the normal, they force their analysis into the sphere of extremes, from paranoia to schizophrenia, from fascism to revolution, from breakdowns to breakthroughs. What is investigated is the process of life flows as they oscillate. Is the process of life flows as they oscillate from one extreme to the other. And that should be the other translation, I'm assuming. Life fluxes. On a scale of intensity. No, start again. From paranoia to schizophrenia, I'll just start a bit higher. Rather than view the creations and productions of desire, or the desiring production, all of desiring production, from the point of view of the norms and the normal, Deleuze and Guattari force their analysis into the sphere of extremes, from paranoia to schizophrenia, from fascism to revolution, from breakdowns to breakthroughs. What is investigated is the process of life flows as they oscillate from one extreme to the other on a scale of intensity that goes from 0, I never asked to be born, leave me in peace, the body without organs, to the nth power, I am all that exists, all the names in history, the schizophrenic process of desire. That's a bit muddy, isn't it? On the scale of clear, extreme, this the experience of delirium. Just get that annoying stuff on my glasses. I should have been prepared and had clean glasses before. Should have. The experience of delirium. In order to carry out this ambitious undertaking, Anti-Oedipus makes joyously unorthodox use of many writers and thinkers whose concepts flow together with all the other elements in the book in what might well be described as a carefully constructed and executed experiment in delirium. See what they did there? Well, Deleuze and Guattari quote frequently from Marx and Freud. It would be an error to view Anti-Oedipus as yet another attempt at a Freud-Marx synthesis. For such an attempt always treats political economy, the flows of capital and interest, and the economy of the libido, the flows of desire, as two separate economies, even in the work of Rich, who went as far as possible in this direction. Deleuze and Guattari, on the other hand, postulate one and the same economy, the economies of flow. The flows and productions of desire will simply be viewed as the unconscious of the social productions. Would the unconscious, be similar to the will in Schopenhauer? Unconscious is a space where things are repressed, and the will is the enlivening thing, so it might be a little bit different. Behind every investment of time and interest and capital, an investment of desire and vice versa. Is that even a complete sentence? I don't think so. So I'm going to pop it in here just for the sake of it, because then it'll tell me what's missing. Paste. It's got no verb. Every sentence seem. You have to have a subject, object, and verb. And there's nouns, subject. And that's connecting word. And blue is a verb. Blue's not there. So what's it trying to say? The flows and production of desire will simply be viewed as the unconscious of the social productions. Behind every investment of time and interest and capital and investment of desire and vice versa. Okay, so there is, behind every investment of time, interest and capital, there is an investment of desire and vice versa. In order to reach this conclusion, a new confrontation was required, not the standard confrontation between a bourgeois Freud and a revolutionary Marx, where Freud ends up the loser, but a more radical confrontation between Marx, the revolutionary, and Nietzsche, the madman. The result of this confrontation, as the authors demonstrate convincingly, is that Freud and psychoanalysis, and perhaps even Lacan, although they remain ambiguous on this point, become impossible. Freud and psychoanalysis become impossible when there's a fight between Marx and Nietzsche. Why Marx and Nietzsche? Not that. Now that's really mixing things up. One might protest at this point. But there is really no cause for alarm. Readers of Marx will be happy to learn that Marx fares quite well in this confrontation. One might even say he is trimmed down to bare essentials and improved upon from the point of view of use. Given Deleuze and Guattari's perspective, this confrontation was inevitable. If one wants to do an analysis of the flows of money and capital that circulate in society, nothing is more useful than Marx and the Marxist theory of money. But if one wishes to analyze if one wishes also to analyze the flows of desire, the fears and the anxieties, the loves and the despairs that traverse the social field as intensive notes from the underground, that is libidinal economy, one must look elsewhere. Since psychoanalysis is of no help, reducing as it does every social manifestation of desire to the familial complex, where is one to turn? To Nietzsche and the Nietzschean theory of affects and intensity, Anti-Oedipus suggests. For here, and especially on the genealogy of morals, is a theory of desire and will, of the conscious and the unconscious forces that relates desire directly to the social field and to a monetary system based on profit. What Nietzsche teaches, as a complement to Marx's theory of alienation, is how the history of mankind is the history of a becoming reactive. And it is Nietzsche, Deleuze and Guattari stress, whose thought already pointed a way out for humanity, whereas Marx and Freud were too ingrained in the culture that they were working against. One could not really view Anti-Oedipus as a purely Nietzschean undertaking, however, for the book would be nothing without the tension between Nietzsche and Marx, between philosophy and politics, between thought and revolution, the tension, in short, between Deleuze, the philosopher, and Guattari, the militant. This tension is quite novel and leads to a combination of the artistic machine, the revolutionary machine, and the analytical machine, a combination of three modes of knowledge, the intuitive, the practical, and the reflective, which all become joined as bits and pieces of one and the same strategical machine, whose target is the ego and the fascist in each of us, extending thought to the point of madness and action to the point of revolution. Theirs is indeed a politics of experience. The experience, however, is no longer that of man, but of what is non-human in man, his desires and his forces, a politics of desire directed against all that is egoic and heroic in man. In addition to Nietzsche, they also found it necessary to listen to others, to Miller and Lawrence and Kafka and Beckett, to Proust and Rilke and Foucault, to Burroughs and Ginsberg, each of whom had different insights concerning madness and dissension, politics and desire. Dissension, is that like saying no? For want of something coming out of my mouth. Disagreement that leads to discord. Yeah, it's like I think of the word at the moment. Middle English, Old French, from Latin, dissentio, now and from verb dissentiri. See, dissent, that's what I'm thinking of. Dissent. Or dissidence, that's the other one I was thinking of. They needed everything they could get their hands on, and they took whatever they could find in an eclectic fashion, closer to Henry Miller than it is to Marx or Freud, more poetic undoubtedly, but also more fun. While Deleuze and Guattari use many authors and concepts, this is never done in an academic fashion aimed at persuading the reader. Rather, they use these names and ideas as effects that traverse their analyses, generating ever new effects as points of reference, indeed, but also as points of intensity and signs pointing a way out. Points, signs that offer a multiplicity of solutions and a variety of directions for a new style of politics. Such an approach carries much along with it in the course of its flow, but it also leaves much behind, chunks of Marx and Freud that cannot keep up with the fast current will be left behind, buried or forgotten, while everything in Marx and Freud that has to do with how things and people and desires actually flow will be kept and added to the infernal machine evoked above. This political analysis of desire, this schizoanalysis, becomes a mighty tool where schizophrenia as a process, the schiz, serves as a point of departure as well as a point of destination. Like laying, they encourage mankind to take a journey, the journey through ego loss. They go much further than laying in this point. On this point, however, they urge mankind to strip itself of all anthropomorphic and anthropological armoring, all myth and tragedy, and all existentialism in order to perceive what is non-human in man, his will and his forces, his transformations and mutations. Nature wants us to return to animal too. The human and social sciences have accustomed us to see the figure of man behind every social event, just as Christianity taught us to see the eye of the Lord looking down upon us. Such forms of knowledge project an image of reality at the expense of reality itself. They talk figures and icons and signs, but fail to perceive forces and flows. They blind us to other realities, and especially the reality of power as it subjugates us. Their function is to tame, and the result is the fabrication of docile and obedient subjects. Schizoanalysis and collectivity. Well, if you didn't have docile and obedient subjects, would there be a Hobbesian state of war? I don't think that's necessary. Because you go under the principle of self-restraint rather than freedom. Schizoanalysis and collectivity. To be anti-Oedipal is to be anti-ego as well as anti-homo. Human. Willfully attacking all reductive psychoanalytic and political analyses that remain caught within the sphere of totality and unity in order to free the multiplicity of desire from the deadly neurotic. Okay, I'll start that a little bit again. Just have a drink of my cold coffee. Schizoanalysis and collectivity. To be anti-Oedipal is to be anti-ego as well as anti-homo. Is that like collective species? Willfully attacking all reductive psychoanalytic and political analyses that remain caught within the sphere of totality and unity in order to free the multiplicity of desire from the deadly neurotic and Oedipal yoke. Well, I'll go by org, actually. 4 orgs are inclusive. It's before humans decided to hum their existence. For Oedipus is not a mere psychoanalytic construct, Deleuze and Guattari explain. Oedipus is the figurehead of imperialism, colonization pursued by other means. It is the interior colony, and we shall see that even here at home, it is our intimate colonial education. This internalization of man by man, this Oedipalization, creates a new meaning for suffering, internal suffering, and a new tone for life, the depressive tone. Now, depression does not just come about one fine day, Oedipus goes on, nor does Oedipus appear one day in the family and feel secure in remaining there. Depression and Oedipus are agencies of the state, agencies of paranoia, agencies of power, long before being delegated to the family. Oedipus is the figure of power as such, just as neurosis is the result of power on individuals. Oedipus is everywhere. For anti-Oedipalists, the ego, like Oedipus, is part of those things we must dismantle through the united assault of analytical and political forces. Deleuze, Trois, Problemes de Gruppe in Felix Guattari, psychoanalyse, yet et transversality. Maspero, 1972 preface. And that was number what? 4. Where do you stop? 4 down here. Excuse me. Anti-Oedipus is belief injected into the unconscious. It is what gives us faith as it robs us of power. It is what teaches us to desire our own repression. Everybody has been Oedipalized and neuroticized at home, at school, at work. Everybody wants to be a fascist. Deleuze and Guattari want to know how these beliefs succeed in taking hold of a body, thereby slicing the productive machines of the libido, silencing. They also want to know how the opposite situation is brought about, where a body successfully wards off the effects of power, reversing the Freudian distinction between neurosis and psychosis that measures everything against the former. Anti-Oedipus concludes the neurotic is the one on whom the Oedipal imprints take, whereas the psychotic is the one incapable of being Oedipalized, even and especially by psychoanalysis. The first task of the revolutionary, they add, is to learn from the psychotic how to shake off the Oedipal yoke and the effects of power in order to initiate a radical politics of desire, freed from all beliefs. Such a politics dissolves the mystifications of power through the kindling on all levels of anti-Oedipal forces, the schizes flows, forces that escape coding, scramble the codes, and flee in all directions. Orphans, no daddy, mummy, me. Atheists, no beliefs. And nomads, no habits, no territories. A schizoanalysis schizophrenizes in order to break the holds of power and institute research into a new collective subjectivity, a revolutionary healing of mankind. For we are sick, so sick of ourselves. It is actually not accurate to say that Deleuze and Guattari developed the schizoanalytic approach, for, as they show, it has always been at work in writers like Miller or Nietzsche or Attard. Stoned thinking based on intensely lived experiences, Pop's philosophy. To put it simply, as does Miller, everybody becomes a healer the moment he forgets about himself. And Miller continues, reality is here and now, everywhere, gleaming through every reflection that meets the eye. Everybody is a neurotic, down to the last man and woman. The healer, or the analyst, if you like, is only a super neurotic. To be cured, we must rise from our graves and throw off the cerements, that a religious notion? Cerement, wax cloth for wrapping a corpse. Okay. 17th century, first used by Shakespeare in Hamlet, 1602, from cere. See cerecloth. Okay then. Cerecloth. Wax cloth used for wrapping a corpse. Late Middle English from earlier cered cloth, from cere, to wax, from Latin cerere, from cera wax. There we go. To be cured, I started passage, the paragraph, yeah. To put it simply, as does Miller, everybody becomes a healer the moment he forgets about himself. And Miller continues, reality is here and now, everywhere, gleaming through every reflection that meets the eye. Everybody is a neurotic, down to the last man and woman. The healer, or the analyst, if you like, is only a super neurotic. To be cured, we must rise from our graves and throw off the cerements of the dead. Nobody can do it for another. It is a private affair, which is best done collectively. Ivan Illich, Tools of Conviviality. Once we forget about our egos, a non-neurotic form of politics becomes possible, where singularity and collectivity are no longer at odds with each other, and where collective expressions of desire are possible. Such a politics does not seek to regiment individuals according to a totalitarian system of norms, but to denormalize and de-individualize through a multiplicity of new collective arrangements against power. Its goal is the transformation of human relationships in a struggle against power. And it urges militant groups as well as lone individuals to analyse and fight against the effects of power that subjugate them. For a revolutionary group at the pre-conscious level remains a subjected group, even in seizing power, as long as this power itself refers to a form of force that continues to enslave and crush desiring production. A subject group, on the contrary, is a group whose libidinal investments are themselves revolutionary. It causes desire to penetrate into the social field and subordinates the socius, or the forms of power, to desiring production. Okay, so why have you given me no words? Socius, look up socius in Wiktionary. Socius, insect anatomy. Socius journals, philosophy, a philosophical concept developed by Deleuze and George. A Sagittary. I'll do that just quickly. Oh, it's about Deleuze. Have you got Socius in there? Just like pointing out in big time. I don't think so. How silly. Do you see Socius there? Oh, something like that. It would be blue if it's got a page, and obviously I haven't got a page because it would be the one I'm on then. Okay, so I would think so anyway. I don't fucking know. Where it just seems like the body of the social body. That's what I can imagine. But it's probably it's got something else in it. Who knows? Someone knows. Someone tell me. Oh, I can ask the bot. I'll ask the bot. How slow of me. Socius. Copy. Bot. Can you see my bot screen? I don't think you can. What is Socius or Deleuze? Deleuze and Guattari. And Guattari question mark. In Oedipus and 1,000 Plateaus, the Socius in Deleuze and Guattari's name is Deleuze and Guattari's name for the social field, the surface onto which a society records, organises, distributes, and regulates flows of desire. It is not society in the ordinary sense, but the infrastructure that makes social life possible, the collective machine that receives, codes, and arranges the forces that individuals and groups produce. Here's the clearest way to grasp it. The socius is a surface of inscription. The socius is like a giant recording surface where desires, products, obligations, debts, kinship, money, and flows of bodies and things are written. It tells a society what counts as a valid obligation, what kinds of production are allowed, how desire must circulate, what is forbidden, permitted, rewarded, and punished. Sounds like a normativity situation. Every mode or gender, but it's all gender is like very small and this is a bit wider. Every mode of social organisation has its own socius. Deleuze and Guattari describe three major forms. Primitive, territorial socius inscribes flows on the earth and the body, uses rituals, kinship, taboos to regulate desire. Everything is coded. Despotic, barbaric socius inscribes flows onto the body of the despot. The emperor, leader, becomes the point of reference. The law and writing emerge as tools to overcode. Capitalist socius, unlike the first two, capitalism decodes and deterritorializes flows. It extracts labour, money, and desire, but cannot fully recode them. It uses the axiomatic of capital, money, markets, prices, state control, instead of ritual or the king. So the socius is the social machine that captures desire, and each society captures it differently. Okay. It captures desire and recodes it to its betterment, to prop itself up better. Societies. Socius is the social machine that captures. It's not the individual that produces desire, it's the socius. I don't know. Is it a round thing? One of D&G's reversals is that desire is productive and its primary field of production is the social, not the private psyche. The socius shapes what desire can do. It's like the condition for it. It makes conditions what we desire. You don't have a desire and then society constrains it. Desire and society are part of the same machinic process. The socius captures and distributes flows. Flows include flows of labour, money, goods, people, desire, signs, fictions, language, and land. Each socius cuts, redirects, appropriates, or opens these flows. For example, capitalism constantly decodes flows. For example, loosening traditional bonds, but recaptures them through the state, wages, banks, policing, etc. 5. The socius is opposed to absolute deterritorialization. D&G say that desire tends to push toward the body without organs, BWO. Absolute openness, no coding. The socius is what keeps this from happening. So socius equals the re-territorializing machine. Body without organs equals the deterritorializing limit. The tension between these two is what makes social life dynamic. Why it matters? Understanding the associus is crucial for D&G because it shows desire is political, not just psychological. Societies are desire machines, not rational structures. Capitalism is unique because it unleashes desire but must constantly capture it again. Revolution and lines of flight depend on the cracks in the socius. Plain summary, the socius is the social machine that records, regulates, and organizes the flows of desire, production, and life in any society. There is no desire outside of the socius. Every society makes its own surface for ordering the movement of forces. If you want, I can also explain how the socius relates to the body without organs, how it ties into full body debt and Nietzsche's debt and inscription, and how it appears differently in Oedipus versus 1,000 Plateaus, how it connects to your reading of Berg, the virtual and lines of flight. Okay, a subject group. I've got to be higher. To put it simply, as does Miller, everybody becomes a healer the moment he forgets about himself. And Miller continues, reality is here and now, everywhere, gleaming through every reflection that meets the eye. Everybody is a neurotic, down to the last man and woman. The healer, or the analyst, if you like, is only a super neurotic. To be cured, we must rise from our graves and throw off the cerements of the dead. Nobody can do it for another. It is a private affair which is best done collectively. Miller, sexist. Once we forget about our egos, a non-neurotic form of politics becomes possible, where singularity and collectivity are no longer at odds with each other, and where collective expressions of desire are possible. Such a politics does not seek to regiment individuals according to a totalitarian system of norms, but to denormalize and de-individualize through a multiplicity of new collective arrangements against power. Its goal is the transformation of human relationships in a struggle against power, and it urges militant groups as well as lone individuals to analyze and fight against the effects of power that subjugate them. For a revolutionary group at the pre-conscious level remains a subjected group, even in seizing power, as long as this power itself refers to a form of force that continues to enslave and crush desiring production. A subject group, on the contrary, is a group whose libidinal investments are themselves revolutionary. It causes desire to penetrate into the social field and subordinates the socius, or the forms of power to desiring production. Productive of desire, and a desire that produces, the subject group always invents mortal formations that eroticize the effusion in it of a death instinct. Effusion, an instance of giving off something such as a liquid or a gas, an escape of fluid into a body cavity, an act of talking or writing in an unrestrained or heartfelt way. Late Middle English from Latin effusion, from effundere, pour out, the effuse. A subject group, on the contrary, is a group whose libidinal investments are themselves revolutionary. It causes desire to penetrate into the social field and subordinates the socius, or the forms of power, to desiring production. Productive of desire and a desire that produces. The subject group always invents mortal formations that exercise the effusion in it of a death instinct. Let's quickly run down the old chatbot. Explain. Explain. Here is the clearest way to understand Deleuze and Guattari's idea of the death instinct. Isn't it Freud's? Importantly, they are not using Freud's concept in a Freudian way. Okay, then. They radically reinterpret it. What Freud meant, very briefly, Freud's death drive, thanatos, is a tendency towards stasis, a return to inorganic being, a compulsion to repeat, the opposite of eros, life drives. It's a drive, so it's desire. Do you reckon you could talk much louder, Michelle? D&G think Freud intuitively glimpsed something real, but he misunderstood what he found. What Deleuze and Guattari think the death instinct really is. For Deleuze and Guattari, the so-called death instinct is not a wish to die. It is the tendency of desire to escape the codes and organizations that bind it. In other words, the death instinct equals the line of absolute deterritorialization, a push toward the body without organs, the limit where all coding breaks down. The death instinct is revolutionary, not destructive. Desire tends toward its own liberation. Desire for D&G is productive, not like Lacan's and Freud's, I suppose. It wants to flow, connect, create, become. But every socius and Schopenhauer's, every socius, primitive, despotic, capitalist, channels desire into certain arrangements. The so-called death instinct is desire's movement past those arrangements, desire's drift away from organization, desire's venture toward openness, intensity, unbound creation, desire's escape. This is why they call it the positive death instinct. The negative death instinct, Freud's mistake. If the state, family, or capitalist socius blocks desire from flowing outward creatively, desire turns inward, implodes, becomes self-destructive, circulates in guilt, repetition, compulsion, neurosis. This is neuronal, anti-productive, fascistic death. Freud saw this negative form and thought it was universal. D&G say, no, that's the death instinct where desire is trapped. Locked desire turns against itself. Free desire becomes creative intensity. Two poles of death in D&G. They distinguish, one, the negative, neurotic death, Freud's version, blockage, repetition, compulsion, self-sabotage, fascist desire, inward collapse. Two, the positive, intensive death, Deleuzean version, escape from fixed identity. Dissolution of rigid codes, creative becoming, reaching zones of intensity, movement toward the body without organs. This second one is what they think Freud glimpsed, but misinterpreted. Death as a limit, not a goal. For D&G, death is not an objective, but a threshold. Desire approaches this limit, the body without organs, to gain new potentials, new assemblages, new intensities. But if the approach is too fast, it can destroy the organism or collapse the subject. Hence their warning. You don't do the body without organs like a junkie. One must experiment with intensities carefully. Seven, summary in one paragraph. The death instinct for D&G, what's after it then? Oh, that's options. The death instinct for D&G is not a wish to die, but the tendency of desire to escape the social and psychic organizations that bind it. Moving toward the limit of deterritorialization and the body without organs. When blocked, this becomes the negative, neurotic, self-destructive form Freud described. When blocked, it is a positive, creative, and when unblocked, it is a positive, creative, transformative force that opens new possibilities of life. Write this down. It's an hour. Okay, so a subject group, on the contrary, is a group whose libidinal investments are themselves revolutionary. Libidinal investments, what they invest their desires into. Yeah. Are themselves revolutionary. It causes desire to penetrate into the social field and subordinates the socius or the forms of power to desiring production. Productive of desire and a desire that produces, the subject group always invents mortal formations that exorcise the effusion of a death instinct, expulsion or something like that. Giving up the death. The subject group always invents mortal formations that exorcise, that's like remove, get out, something out, like a bad demon, gets out the gas within in it, in the subject group of the death instinct, of a death instinct. Which death instinct? It opposes real coefficients of transversality to the symbolic determinations of subject of subjugation. Coefficients without, instead of a singularity, I suppose, without a hierarchy or a group superego, there can be no revolutionary actions. Why do you want that right now? Anyway, where was I? There can be no revolutionary actions, Oedipus concludes, where the relations between people and groups are relations of exclusion and segregation. Groups must multiply and connect in ever new ways, freeing up territorialities for the construction of new social arrangements. Theory must therefore be conceived as a toolbox, producing tools that work, or as Ivan Illich says, we must learn to construct tools for conviviality through the use of counterfoil research. 6. Ivan Illich, tools for conviviality. Harper and Rowe, 73. When Illich speaks of convivial reconstruction, he is very close to Deleuze and Guattari's notion of a desiring revolution. Like Deleuze and Guattari, Illich also calls for a radical reversal of the relationships between individuals and tools or machines. This reversal would permit the evolution of a lifestyle and of a political system which give priority to the protection, the maximum use, and the enjoyment of the one resource that is almost equally distributed among all people, personal energy under personal control. Oh, wouldn't that be nice? All three authors agree that such a reversal must be governed by a collective political process and not by professionals and experts, e.g., politicians. Career politicians, that's what I mean. The ultimate answer to neurotic dependencies on professionals is mutual self-care. On professionals, is that why they make square buildings? Because you have to get a professional to make your cleaning equipment that fits into a 90-degree angle, for example. 8, CI. In this respect, Ivan Illich, medical nemesis, the expropriation of health, Pantheon, 1976. New York. Freed from a psychoanalytic framework, the political group or collective cannot, however, push aside the problem of desire, nor can it leave desire in the hands of new experts. It must analyse the function of desire in itself and in the groups with which it is involved. What is the function of desire? And Oedipus asks, if not one of making connections. For to be bogged down in arrangements from which escape is possible is to be neurotic, seeing an irresolvable crisis where alternatives in fact exist. And as Deleuze and Guattari comment, perhaps it will be discovered that the only incurable is the neurotic. Thanks. There's hope. We defend so cautiously against our egoically limited experiences. We defend so cautiously against our egoically limited experiences, states laying in the politics of experience, that it is not surprising to see people grow defensive and panic at the idea of experiencing ego loss through the use of drugs or collective experiences. That's what Schopenhauer also says, ego loss. As a self, as a self-will, willlessness. But there is nothing pathological about ego loss. Laying adds, quite the contrary. Ego loss is the experience of all mankind, of the primal man, of Adam, and perhaps even a journey further into the beings of animals, vegetables, and minerals. 9. R.D. Laying, The Politics of Experience, New York, Valentine Books, 1971, page 126. No age, Laying concludes, has so lost touch with this healing process as has ours. Deleuze and Guattari's schizoanalytic approach serves to begin such a healing process. Its major task is to destroy the Oedipalized and neuroticized individual dependencies through the forging of a collective subjectivity, a non-fascist subject, anti-Oedipus. Anti-Oedipus is an individual or a group that no longer functions in terms of beliefs and that comes to redeem mankind, as Nietzsche foresaw, not only from the ideals that weighed it down, but also from that which was bound to grow out of it, the great nausea, the will to nothingness, nihilism, this bell stroke of noon and of the great decision that liberates the will again and restores its goal to the earth and his hope to man, this antichrist and anti-nihilist, he must come one day. Nature, on the genealogy of morals. II, 24, page 96. Unlike Nietzsche's anti-nihilist, however, Deleuze and Guattari's anti-Oedipus is not alone. Anti-Oedipus is not the Superman. It's not Superman, it's Overman. It is not transcendent. Where Nietzsche grew progressively more isolated to the point of madness, Deleuze and Guattari call for actions and passions of a collective nature, here and now. Madness is a radical break from power in the form of a disconnection. Militancy, in Deleuze and Guattari's framework, would learn from madness, but then move beyond it, beyond disconnections and deterritorializations to ever new connections. A politics of desire would see loneliness and depression as the first things to go. Such is the anti-Oedipal strategy. If man is connected to the machines of the universe, if he is in tune with his desires, if he is anchored, he ceases to worry about the fitness of things, about the behaviour of his fellow men, about right or wrong and justice and injustice. If his roots are in the current of life, he will float on the surface like a lotus, and he will bloom and give forth fruit. The life that's in him will manifest itself in growth, and growth is an endless, eternal process. The process of is everything. 11, Miller, Sexus, page 127. It is this process of desiring production that anti-Oedipus sets out to analyse. For if desire is repressed in a society, Deleuze and Guattari state, this is hardly because it is a desire for the mother or for the death of the father. On the contrary, desire becomes that only because it is repressed. It takes that mask on under the reign of the repression that models the mask for it and plasters it on its face. For if desire is repressed in a society, Deleuze and Guattari state, this is hardly because it is a desire for the mother or for the death of the father. On the contrary, desire becomes that only because it is repressed. It takes and only because it is repressed, it takes the mask, that mask on, under the reign of the repression that models the mask for it and plasters it on its face. The real danger is elsewhere. If the desire is repressed, it is because every position of desire, no matter how small, is capable of calling into question the established order of a society. Not that desire is asocial, on the contrary, but it is explosive. There is no desiring machine capable of being assembled without demolishing entire social sectors. Just the try. Deleuze and Guattari conclude that desire, any desiring machine, is always a combination of various elements and forces of all types. Hence, the need to listen not only to revolutionaries, but to all those who know how to be truly objective. Revolutionaries, artists, and seers. I'm an apprentice. Oga. Oh, yeah. read birds. Revolutionaries, artists, and seers, like they did in ancient Rome, ancient Greece. Revolutionaries to get the divine message. But mine doesn't have to be divine, just they are messages. Revolutionaries, artists, and seers. So it's around 8 o'clock in the evening. Revolutionaries, artists, and seers, and content. With that, Deleuze and Guattari conclude that desire and desiring machine is always a combination of various elements and forces of all types. Hence, the need to listen not only to revolutionaries, but to all those who know how to be truly objective. Revolutionaries, artists, and seers, and content to be objective, merely objective. Might need to be an and content to be objective, merely objective. They know that desire clasps life in its powerfully productive embrace and reproduces it in a way all the more intense because it has few needs. And never mind those who believe that this is very easy to say, or that it is the sort of idea to be found in books. Anti-Oedipus. Anti-Oedipi. Is that just like it's a page number or something? The Desiring Machines, translated by Helen R. Lane, Robert Hurley, and Mark Seam. 1. Desiring production. It is at work everywhere, functioning smoothly at times, at other times in fits and starts. It breathes, it heats, it eats, it shits and fucks. What a mistake to have ever said the id. The id again, it's not the superego. What's the id again? I just have to remember. I didn't remember the id. I'll get asked the born. And I'll get the wrong impression. At least I'll get an impression. You call me Pollyanna. What's the id? Is the clearest way to understand the id and how, and also how Deleuze and Guattari overturned the concept. What Freud meant by the id. In Freud's model of the psyche, id, ego, superego, the id is the unconscious, the source of instinctual drives, sex, aggression, hunger, governed by the pleasure principle. I think I wrote down what that meant. I can't remember. Was it in Lacan's? I don't remember it being there. Chaotic, illogical, pre-linguistic, seeking immediate discharge of tension, pure desire without form or structure. The classic definition, the id is the reserve of unconscious drives and energies. It is not rational, moral, or socially shaped. Those belong to the ego and superego. Deleuze and Guattari, there is no id and no ego or superego. In Anti-Oedipus, D&G completely reject Freud's psychic architecture. They say the psyche is not composed of 3 agencies. Instead, there are only machines and flows, desiring machines, social machines, recording machines, all hooking into each other. The Freudian id is for them a representational fiction, I should say, a metaphor that individualizes desire, a way to domesticate desire inside the family, Oedipus. What Freud calls id equals, for D&G, the body without organs. Freud's id resembles a reservoir of undifferentiated energy, but he treats it as a hidden personal interior. D&G say this is a mistake. What Freud thought was the id is actually the body without organs, a field of potential, a surface of intensities, pre-personal, not inside a person at all, not instinctual drives, but productive desire itself. The body without organs is not a psychic compartment. It's a limit surface of the entire desiring production process. Why D&G reject the id? 3 key reasons. The id individualizes desire. Freud locates desire inside a person. In their private unconscious, D&G argue that desire is social and machinic. It already circulates in the socius, not inside you. The id presupposes lack. Freud treats desire as lack, something missing that seeks satisfaction. D&G think desire is productive, not lack. It builds worlds, assemblages, connections, machines. The id is too tied to Oedipus. Freud thinks the id's energies must be tamed, channeled into family dramas, mum, dad, me. D&G think Oedipus is a repressive straitjacket imposed by psychoanalysis and the state. The id becomes a way to blame desire, privatize it, and subject it. What replaces the id in D&G's model? Instead of the id, ego, and superego, they propose A, desiring machines, little functional units that connect flows, not fantasies, real machines. B, the body without organs, the field where desire is distributed, blocked, opened, intensified. The socius, the social surface that codes desire on a collective scale. Together, these replace Freud's internal psychic agencies. Summary in 1 paragraph. For Freud, the id is the unconscious reservoir of instinctual drives governed by the pleasure principle. What's the pleasure principle again? What's the pleasure principle? Pleasure principle. Oh, I didn't fucking finish reading that. I just ran back up and finished that bit. Just down here. For Deleuze and Guattari, the division of the psyche is a fiction. There is no id. What Freud mistook for the id is actually the body without organs, the impersonal field of productive desire and intensities that is not inside a person, but part of a machinic, social, pre-personal process. Here's the clearest way to understand the pleasure principle in both Freud and in Deleuze and Guattari's reworking of it. 1, Freud. What is the pleasure principle? For Freud, the pleasure principle is the basic rule of the id. The psyche tries to reduce tension and seek immediate gratification. This means we avoid unpleasure, pain, tension, anxiety. We seek pleasure, release, discharge, satisfaction. The mind wants homeostasis, a return to low tension state, A-low-tension. In simple terms, pleasure equals discharge of accumulated excitation, unpleasure built up of excitation. The pleasure principle drives all primary processes of the unconscious, dreams, slips, fantasies, wishes. 2, Freud later complicates it with the death drive. Freud eventually admits that not all behavior is governed by the pleasure principle. Repetition, compulsions, trauma, self-sabotage, these seem to defy pleasure. This leads him to propose the death drive, a tendency that moves beyond the pleasure principle. So in Freud, pleasure principle equals seeks relief. Reality principle delays gratification for survival. Death drive, the beyond repetition, stasis, destruction. Deleuze and Guattari, the pleasure principle is repression. In Anti-Oedipus, Deleuze and Guattari flip the concept upside down. For them, the pleasure principle belongs to the Oedipal neurotic molar psyche. It is not the basis of desire. It is what stops desire. Why? Because the pleasure principle reduces desire to organ functions, penis, breast, mother, father, instead of allowing it to operate machinically and expansively. Pleasure becomes the organism trying to stabilize intensity, the ego trying to maintain itself, the neurotic subject trying to avoid becoming unhinged. Where Freud says desire seeks pleasure, D&G say desire produces flows and connections. Pleasure is only an effect, not a cause. I'm getting a bit hungry at the moment. Desire does not obey the pleasure principle. For D&G, desire follows flows. Intensities, becomings, connections, deterritorializations. Desire is like electricity running through a circuit, not a baby looking for release. Therefore, desire equals productive, pleasure equals a byproduct. Pleasure is a momentary consumption or exhaustion of a process, not its motivation. This is why they say pleasure can interrupt a line of flight. Pleasure can shut down a machine. Pleasure can re-territorialize you. They don't moralize this. It's simply a limit phenomenon. The pleasure principle is the organism defending itself. On the body without organs, desire tends toward higher and higher intensities, but the organism, your structured identity, your molar personhood, tries to protect itself. Pleasure is one of its ways of shutting down the intensity before it becomes too much. So in D&G, pleasure equals a safety valve, desire equals the engine. Pleasure helps preserve the organism, the ego, and the stable self. Desire threatens to undo them. Summary, Freud's pleasure principle is the rule that the psyche seeks to reduce tension and maximize pleasure through discharge. For Deleuze and Guattari, this is not the basis of desire, but a secondary limiting mechanism of the organism and the ego. Pleasure is a way of stopping or stabilizing intensities, while desire itself is a productive machinic force that does not seek pleasure, but generates it as a side effect. Give me the shit. I'm just going to have a little look in that. This way. This one. Can I scroll there, mate? Primary processes and the drives right through desires are governed by the pleasure principle, eros, to have the drives satisfied. They are desexualized and are in the id. The ego negotiates the drives. Well, maybe not then. Oh. Original pleasure, Freud, pleasure, ego. Pleasure ego is the original ego that desires positivity to come into itself while rejecting the negative that's undesirable. I don't understand nothing, man. Oh, flipping hell. Oh, well, I'm just up here, aren't I, at the edge? That's okay then. What a mistake to have ever said be in. Everywhere it is machines, real ones, not figurative ones, machines driving other machines, machines being driven by other machines with all the necessary couplings and connections. An organ machine is plugged into an energy source machine. The one produces a flow that the other interrupts. The breast is a machine that produces milk, and the mouth is machine coupled to it. The mouth of the anorexic wavers between several functions. Its possessor is uncertain as to whether it is an eating machine, an anal machine, a talking machine, or a breathing machine. Asthma attacks. Hence, we are all handymen, each with his little machines. For every organ machine, an energy machine, all the time flows and interruptions. Judge Schreiber has sunbeams in his ass, a solar anus, and rest assured that it works. Judge Schreiber feels something, produces something, and is capable of explaining the process theoretically. Something is produced. The side effects of a machine, not mere metaphors. Daniel Paul Schreiber was a German judge who began psychiatric treatment in 1884 at the age of 42 and spent the remaining 27 years of his life in and out of mental institutions. In 1903, at the age of 61, he published his Denkwerkstätten Ernest Nervenkranken, Memoirs of a Nervous Illness, which Freud used as the basis of his influential 1911 study on paranoia. Psychoanalytic Notes, reference note 7, page 384 of this volume, pages 390 to 472. Translator's note. Where was I? Asterisk. A schizophrenic out for a walk is a better model than a neurotic lying on the analyst's couch. A breath of fresh air, a relationship with the outside world, lenses stroll, for example, as reconstructed by Butchner. This walk outdoors is different from the moments when Lenz finds himself closeted with his pastor, who forces him to situate himself socially, a relationship to the God of established religion in relationship to his father, to his mother. While taking a stroll outdoors, on the other hand, he is in the mountains amid falling snowflakes with other gods, or without any gods at all, without a family, without a father or a mother, with nature. What does my father want? Can he offer me more than that? Impossible. Leave me in peace. I need to move that now. See Gorge, Butchner, Lenz, Incomplete Plays and Prose, translated by Carl Richard, Malella, New York, Hill and Wang, 1963, page 141. Everything is a machine. Celestial machines, the stars or rainbows in the sky, alpine machines, all of them connected to those of his body. The continual whir of machines. He thought that he must be a feeling. He thought that it must be a feeling of endless bliss to be in contact with the profound life of every form, to have a soul for rocks, metals, water, and plants, to take into himself, as in a dream, every element of nature, like flowers that breathe with the waxing and waning of the moon. 1a, Ibid. To be a chlorophyll or a photosynthesis machine, or at least slip his body into such machines as one part among others. Lenz has projected himself back to a time before the man-nature dichotomy, before all the coordinates based on this fundamental dichotomy have been laid down. He does not live nature as nature, but as a process of production. There is no such thing as either man or nature now, only a process that produces the one within the other and couples the machines together, producing machines, desiring machines everywhere, schizophrenic machines, all of species life, the self and the non-self, outside and inside, no longer have any meaning whatsoever. Now that we have had a look at this stroll of a schizo, let us compare what happens when Samuel Beckett's characters decide to venture outdoors. Their various gaits and methods of self-locomotion constitute, in and of themselves, a finely tuned machine. And then there is the function of the bicycle in Beckett's works. What relationship does the bicycle horn machine have with the mother anus machine? What a rest to speak of bicycles and horns. Unfortunately, it is not of them I have to speak, but of her who brought me into the world through the whole of her arse, if my memory is correct. To Samuel Beckett, Malloy, in 3 novels by Samuel Beckett. Beckett with a double T. New York Groove Press, 1959, page 16. Malloy was translated from the French by Patrick Bowles, in collaboration with the author. Translator's note. It is often thought that Oedipus, asterisk, as will be seen below, the term Oedipus has many widely varying connotations in this volume. It refers, for instance, not only to the Greek myth of Oedipus and to the Oedipus complex, as defined by classical psychoanalysis, but also to Oedipal mechanisms, processes, and structures. The translators follow the author's use and employ the word Oedipus by itself, using the more traditional term Oedipus complex only when the authors do so. Translator's note. It is often thought that Oedipus is an easy subject to deal with, something perfectly obvious, a given that is there from the very beginning. But that is not so at all. Oedipus presupposes a fantastic repression of desiring machines. And why are they repressed? To what end? Is it really necessary or desirable to submit to such repression? And what means are to be used to accomplish this? What ought to go inside the Oedipal triangle? What sort of thing is required to construct it? Are a bicycle horn and my mother's ass sufficient to do the job? Aren't there more important questions than these, however? Given a certain effect, what machine is capable of producing it? And given a certain machine, what can it be used for? Can we possibly guess, for instance, what a knife rest is used for, if all we are given is a geometrical description of it? Or yet another example, on being confronted with a complete machine made up of 6 stones in the right-hand pocket of my coat, the pocket that serves as the source of the stones, 5 stones in the right-hand pocket of my trousers, and 5 in the left-hand pocket, transmission pockets, with the remaining pocket of my coat receiving the stones that have already been handled. As each of the stones moves forward 1 pocket, how can we determine the effect of this circuit of distribution in which the mouth too plays a role as a stone-sucking machine? Where is this entire circuit? Where in this entire circuit do we find the production of sexual pleasure? At the end of Malone Dies, Lady Peddle takes the schizophrenics out for a ride in a van and a rowboat, and on a picnic in the midst of nature, an infernal machine is being assembled. Under the skin of the body is an overheated factory, and outside the invalid shines, glows from every burst pore. 3. Antonin Archard Van Gogh, the man suicided by society. Translated Mary Beach and Lawrence Berlinghetti. in Artard, Artuard, Artiard, Artard. Okay. Anthology, San Francisco City Lights, books, 1965 and 158. This does not mean that we are attempting to make nature one of the poles of schizophrenia. What the schizophrenic experiences, both as an individual and as a member of the human species, is not at all any one specific aspect of nature, but nature as a process of production. What do we mean here by process? It is probable that at a certain level, nature and industry are two separate and distinct things. From one point of view, industry is the opposite of nature. From another, industry extracts its raw materials from nature. From yet another, it returns its refuse to nature, and so on. Even within society, this characteristic man-nature, industry-nature, society-nature relationship is responsible for the distinction of relatively autonomous spheres that are called production, distribution, consumption. But in general, this entire level of distinctions, examined from the point of view of its formal developed structures, presupposes, as Marx has demonstrated, not only the existence of capital and the division of labour, but also the false consciousness that the capitalist being necessarily acquires, both of itself and of the supposedly fixed elements within an overall process. For the real truth of the matter, the glaring, sober truth that resides in delirium is that there is no such thing as relatively independent spheres or circuits. Production is immediately consumption, and a recording process, enregistrement. The French term enregistrement has a number of meanings, among them the process of making a recording to be played back by a mechanical device, e.g. a phonograph, a recording so made, e.g. a phonograph record or a magnetic tape, and the entering of births, deaths, deeds, marriages, and so on in an official register. Translator's note. For the real truth of the matter, the glaring sober truth that resides in delirium is that there is no such thing as relatively independent spheres or circuits. Production is immediately consumption, and a recording process without any sort of mediation, and the recording process and consumption directly determine production, though they do so within the production process itself. Hence, everything is production, production of productions, of actions and of passions, productions of recording processes, of distributions and of coordinates that serve as points of reference, productions of consumptions, of sensual pleasures, of anxieties and of pain. Everything is production, since the recording processes are immediately consumed, immediately consummated, and these consumptions directly reproduced. Well, I don't know. Is it down the bottom here? Yes, I suppose. It's a T there. When gorgeous Bataille speaks of sumptuary, non-productive expenditures or consumptions in connection with the energy of nature, these are expenditures or consumptions that are not part of the supposedly independent sphere of human production, insofar as the latter is determined by the useful. They, therefore, have to do with what we call the production of consumption. See gorgeous Bataille, late Lapart, Mordite, Placidi, de la notion de pense. Paris Editions de Minuit. My accent must be terrible. This is the first meaning of process, as we use the term, incorporating, recording, and consumption within production itself. Shouldn't have a comma there. Incorporating, recording, and consumption within production itself, thus making them the productions of one and the same process. Second, we make no distinction between man and nature. The human essence of nature and the natural essence of man become one within nature in the form of production or industry, just as they do within the life of man as species. Industry is no longer considered from the extrinsic point of view of utility, but rather from the point of view of its fundamental identity with nature as production of man and by man. On the identity of nature and production, the species life in general, according to Marx, see the commentaries of Gerard Granel, the Ontologie Marxiste de 1844, et la question de la coupe in l'endurance de la pense et Paris Plon, 1968, pages 301 to 310. Not man as the king of creation, but rather as the being who is in intimate contact with the profound life of all forms and all types of beings, who is responsible for even the stars and animal life, and who ceaselessly plugs an organ machine into an energy machine, a tree into his body, a breast into his mouth, the sun into his asshole, the eternal custodian of the machines of the universe. This is the second meaning of process, as we use the term. Man and nature are not like two opposite terms confronting each other, not even in the sense of bipolar opposites within a relationship of causation, ideation, or expression, cause and effect, subject and object, etc. Rather, they are one and the same essential reality. The producer product, production as process, overtakes all idealistic categories and constitutes a cycle whose relationship to desire is that of an immanent principle. This is why desiring production is the principal concern of a materialist psychiatry, which conceives of and deals with the schizo as homo natura. Did you tell me? I've got a note on that. Is there just one note? How will I find it? It's in Lem. I'm pretty sure. One's natura and one's naturata. And Spinoza's subjects. And one's God is nature and one's God is God, I think. I'll go with those. It's probably just translatable. I'll go in the book of the untranslatables dictionary. Look up Homo natura. Homo natura, nature, philosophical. Okay, so Nietzsche coins the enigmatic term homo natura to capture his understanding of the human being as a creature of nature and takes philosophy with the renaturalization of humanity. Following Foucault's critique of the human sciences, Vanessa Lem discusses the reception of Nietzsche's naturalism in philosophical anthropology, psychoanalysis, and gender studies. Homo natura is key text for those. Well, that's why I read it. No. Jesus Christ. Mm, mm, mm. First one. Um, um, I didn't do that one because I didn't put it away in the right spot. Okay, that just quickly. I just squared over here quickly. A little digression. No, will it take me long? Why don't you search it? That's a good idea. This way. Let's do more, I think. Oh, how can I see? Homo natura. Isn't it say? You I. Oh, oh, that's sad, mate. There. What's this? That's PDF. Canvas. PDF. Hot flush. I've got a hot flush. I'm having a hot flush. I'm gonna have to get an ice pole. How am I gonna eat? Not my tongue. Eat, read. Can't read with my mouth. Oh. Cancer economizes the human. I just scan it down like this. I have to read that. Maybe it's in the side. Check this right. That's it. What do you mean? Is it under here? No. All right, I know what I look for. I'm sweating big time on my brow. Spinoza. Spin. Inosa. Mm. Can you look for MDs as opposed to payouts? The Open Society, is that where it is? I think it is as well. Okay. Dokele, dokele. Oh, blah, blah. that it? Yeah. It is in order to return to natura naturans. What am I looking for? Is it not natura naturans? Is it homo natura? Oh, fuckwit. Is it homo natura? I don't know. I'll just go back and I'll just click this open to another. Open to the right. And I'll just go back to there. Back again. Now, the tie. Well, it's new very, very thoroughly. Where's the fucking edge? Is it in the footnote? No. Oh, no. It's crashed. It's fucking arsehole. Oh, it's telling me I'm going to fucking nagging me. I don't like that. I like it at the start where it said person is their own fucking will. Go and send seals.